Hi, I'm Lisa Bardot, and in this tutorial, I'm going to teach you how to draw this spooky skull with a really cool glowing candle on top. You're going to learn a lot about using layers and clipping mask in Procreate, as well as some tips about shading and working with blend modes. For this tutorial, I'll be using brushes from my basic toolkit. If you're new to Procreate, I recommend watching my Procreate for Beginners tutorial to get you familiar with the basics. And if you want to take your learning to the next level, you should join Art Makers Club. Art Makers Club is a joy-filled creative community and learning hub for digital art makers. As a member, you'll get access to a growing library of in-depth courses, live virtual events and tutorials, free Procreate brushes, and more. You get to watch this tutorial ad-free with additional written instructions, get my exact color palette, and Procreate file to dig into. Plus, members get a bonus section on how to simplify and stylize a skull using provided reference photos. I give you a candid look at my drawing process to go from a basic, run-of-the-mill skull to something more interesting. Find out more at artmakersclub.com. Let's get started. Let's begin by creating a new canvas. For this piece, the canvas size I'm going to be using is 2800 by 3500 pixels. We'll begin this illustration with a sketch. For sketching, I like to use my sketching pencil brush that I made, which is a part of my pencil box set, but you can use any sketching pencil that you'd like. And then for the color, I'm just going to choose a nice dark color. Start by drawing a circle. Then we're going to divide that circle in half just below the midpoint. We're going to imagine the circle is a 3D sphere. So I'm going to draw a line that kind of contours around the sphere and then goes straight down like this. Then I'm going to draw a line from that middle line down and then again right there and then across the bottom like that. And you can already see the skull start to take shape. We'll zoom in a little bit here. Right here, I'll draw an upside down heart to represent the nose. Then we'll draw the eyes, which will be ovals that kind of point inwards like this. So the first one's going to be over here. Draw a nice big oval like that. And then the oval on this side is a little more squished because it's foreshortened. So just draw it a little bit skinnier than the other one. And then I'm going to add some lines for the mouth. So the top and bottom of the teeth, and then divide that in half. And now we're going to add a few lines to give this skull a little more shape. Here's a little example of a skull for you. Just to kind of pick up on some of the details, we've got a little bit of a kind of bulge that comes out to the side here. And we've got this kind of shape that sticks out here. Obviously, I'm not being very technical and scientific with this, but it kind of gives you an idea of some of the shapes that you can add to make it just look a little more realistic while trying to keep it still stylized. So over on this side, I'm going to draw a line that kind of bulges out like that, goes back in, and then kind of bulges out like that on the top. And then I'm going to draw a line that kind of follows the shape of the eye, but then goes way out like this, and then connects to the top line of teeth. And then we'll connect the bottom of the jaw up to that shape we just made. And then the bottom of the teeth will also connect up to that shape. You can obviously add more details if you want, but I'm trying to go for something pretty simple. I'm going to give the chin just a little bit more shape by kind of rounding it out like that. And then finally, I'm going to add a little more volume to the skull by just kind of drawing some extra shape right there on the side of the circle. And that's our skull. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the transform tool here, and I'm just going to kind of rotate it and resize it a little bit. I'm going to be drawing a candle that sits on top of the skull. So I need to make this a little bit smaller, and then I'm rotating it so that I can, it might naturally sit a little sideways when it's like sitting flat on something like this one. So that's what I'm doing here. I think that angle looks pretty good. Now I'm going to draw my candle. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit, and I'm going to draw an oval that kind of sits on top. Just zooming out to make sure it doesn't look crooked. It kind of does look like it's kind of leaning that way. So I'm going to try that again. That looks a little bit better. And then I'm going to draw two lines going up to form the height of the candle. I don't want it to be super tall. So just a little bit of height there. And then kind of a wavy sort of line like that, because the candle is melted down a little bit. So it's going to be a little irregular at the top. And then the wax is going to be kind of puddling down here at the bottom. So I'm just going to draw some lines to kind of give that some shape there. And then kind of make this like wavy shape along the bottom of the candle. I'm also going to be drawing some wax that's kind of like melting down and dripping down. So I'll draw some kind of lines going like that, coming out of these dips in the candle. So I'll draw one here too. And so you want to just make sure you're following the contours of the skull as you draw this drippy wax. Maybe I'll do one more right here, just kind of a little bit shorter than the other one. And then I might even have some wax that's kind of like falling down the side over there. I think that looks really good. And then I'm going to add a wick like that. And of course, a flame. So just kind of like a tall egg shape for the flame. Now we're all done with our sketch and I'm ready to move on to color. The first thing I'm going to do to color this is set my background color. So I'm going to go up to my layers and I'm going to choose background color. And for this piece, I'm going to choose a nice purple color. I'm going to kind of go a little cooler into the purples and something right there. Not super saturated, a little dark. So that's the color that I'm using there. And then I'm going to go back into my layers and I'm going to create a new layer. So just tap the plus sign and then I'm going to move my sketch layer, tap, hold, and drag to move it above the new layer I just made. Tap the N on the sketch layer and reduce the opacity so that you can just barely see it. We're just going to use it as a guide as we draw. Then I'll go over to my colors and I'm going to choose white. So to choose a pure white, I'm going to tap close to white and it will snap to a pure white value. And then for my brushes, I'm going to be using brushes from my basic toolkit to do this illustration. If you don't have this set, I'll kind of give you some suggestions of what kinds of brushes that you can use, but I really love this set for doing this type of illustration. So I'm going to start with the inker brush, which is a nice semi-smooth brush. It's got a little bit of a textured edge to it, but it's great for drawing shapes. And then I just want to make sure I'm on the right layer, which I was not. So make sure you're on the bottom layer, not the one with the sketch. And I'm going to begin by drawing my skull. So I'm just going to draw my entire outline of the whole skull shape. Make sure it's a completely closed shape. I'm just kind of tracing over my sketch. And then once you've done that, you can fill it in with color drop. Now I'm going to work on some of the details. So I'm going to go up to my layers. I'm going to tap the plus sign to create a new layer. And I'm going to use a clipping mask to draw my details. So I'm going to tap this new layer and in the layer options menu, I'm going to tap clipping mask. And now anything that I draw in this new layer, it will only show up if it's within the shape of the layer below it, which is the skull. For my colors, I'm going to choose a black. And then for my brushes, I'm going to switch to a new brush now. I'm going to use the grainy liner brush. And this is a brush that I made specifically for doing line work and it has some really great texture in it. So that's the brush that I'm going to be using next. And I'll start by doing my kind of facial features here. So I'm just going to trace an outline of the nose and kind of color it in like this. If you color it in by hand, you'll get some of these nice like little white spots, which give it even more texture. And I'll do one of the eyes. And then I'll do the other eye over here. And you could fill this in with color drop, but keep in mind that is a textured brush, so it might not fill it in all the way. Plus, I do like when you hand color, you get some of these like little white mark textures. So I kind of like that. So it's kind of up to you if you want to have that texture or not. There we go. Okay, so now let's do some of these line details over here. Just going to trace over my sketch, kind of like that. And then I'll do this line here. And then this line down here at the bottom of the jaw. And now I can do my teeth. So the teeth I'm having kind of end like where the middle of this eye is. And then I'll draw a line down the middle and then draw individual teeth. We're not going for anything super realistic. We're going for more of a stylized approach to this. So don't worry if it's not perfect. And then don't forget to color in this little kind of gap between the teeth and the jaw. So those are the details for the skull. I am going to add a little bit of texture to this before I move on to the candle. So I'm going to go back to the layer that has the white skull shape, and I'm going to turn on alpha lock. I'm going to use a 2-finger swipe to the right to do that, and you'll see a checkerboard pattern on that layer. And that means that whatever I draw on this layer, I can only draw within the shape that's already on the layer. So I can't draw outside of it. So I'm going to go to my colors. I'm going to go into the yellows, and I'm going to choose like a little bit off white. So I'm kind of starting at white and then kind of going down into the disc this way. And then for the brush, I'm going to use the coarse shader brush. And this is a brush that has soft edges, so it's great for shading, but it has a nice grungy texture to it. And then I'm going to increase my brush size. I'm at like 40%, maybe a little bit bigger, 45. And then I'm just going to paint in some texture kind of all over this, but I am kind of leaving the top white because we're going to have a glowing candle. So I kind of want it to be brighter than the rest of it. We're going to add more shading to this, but this is just kind of some initial texture. Okay, that looks good. I'm ready to work on the candle. I'm going to go up to my layers, and I'm going to tap the top layer with the kind of face details. And then I'm going to tap the plus sign to create a layer right above that. And I'm going to go to my brushes. I'm going to switch back to that inker brush that I used to draw the shape of the skull. And then for my colors, I'm actually going to sample the background color, and then I'm going to choose a variation of that color. Sampling colors that you already have on your canvas and just using a slight variation is a good way to have a cohesive color palette. So I'm just going to go a little warmer and then a little lighter, and then I'll just draw and see if that's a good looking color. I think that looks nice with the purple background, so I'll start there. So now I'm going to just outline my candle. I'm not going to draw those drippy parts yet. I'll do those in a second. So I'm just kind of outlining it. Doesn't have to be perfect because this is like a melty candle. Then I'll fill that in with color drop. And now I'll go in and draw my waxy drips. Just make sure that these drips kind of have like a bulbous shape at the end of them. That'll make it look a little more realistic. And I think I've got one over here too. There we go. That looks pretty good. And I'm going to draw all the shapes for the candle. So I'm going to do the flame next. I'm going to tap the plus sign to create a new layer. And I'll switch to an orange color to start. And I'll draw the shape of the flame. And fill that with color drop. And now I'm add a little yellow to this flame. So I'm going to go to my layers. I'm going to turn on alpha lock on the layer with the flame. And then I'm going to switch to a really bright yellow, like a nice bright intense yellow. And then for my brush, I'm going to switch back to the coarse shader brush. So choose like a soft shading brush for this. I'm going to go down with my brush size. I'm at 5%, which that looks pretty good. So I'm just going to paint in just kind of like a lighter area, kind of where the wick would be. There we go. And then the next thing I'm going to do is draw in my wick. So this is a good time to reevaluate layers. I want the wick to be behind the purple candle, but in front of the flame. So I need to move my flame under the candle. And sometimes it'll do this where if you put a layer like right above another clipping mask, it'll turn into a clipping mask. So if that happens, just tap the layer and uncheck clipping mask. And then I'm going to create another layer right above the flame. For my colors, I'm going to choose black. And then for my brush, I'm going to choose that grainy liner brush. So I'll just draw in my wick like that. Okay, so we've drawn the main shapes of our illustration. It's time to add a little bit more texture as well as some shading. So I'm going to start with this candle, just like I did with the skull. I'm going to go to the layer with the candle shape, turn on alpha lock, and then I'm going to select the candle color. And I'm going to choose maybe a slightly darker version of that color, darker and more saturated. And then I'll use that coarse shader brush to just kind of, oops, make it a little bit bigger. Increase the brush size. I'm at 38%. And then just brush some texture over it like this, just to kind of make it not so flat. And I'm kind of concentrating the texture kind of in the middle of the candle because if we're thinking about shading and lighting, like this part would be the brightest. This part would be also bright from the light cast down onto it. So the middle of it would be the darkest. We'll work on some shading. This is just kind of like enhancing the shading with our texture that we're adding. So next I'm going to paint some details to kind of give these wax strips some shape. So I'm going to tap the plus sign to create a new layer above the candle layer, tap that new layer, and then tap clipping mask to make that be a clipping mask. Then for my colors, I'm going to choose a lighter, maybe warmer version of that color. And then I'm going to switch over to the grainy liner brush. And just to see, okay, I think that's a good color. So all I'm going to do is just outline the edges of these kind of wax strips, kind of paint a little bit into the little bulbous part at the end, like that, just so you can kind of see that they're there. These kind of help define them a little bit more. And we can even add a little bit here if we want. So now we can see them a little bit better. And now that we've done that, we can go ahead and turn off the sketch. So I'm going to go up to my layers and just uncheck the layer with the sketch. So it's looking a little flat. Let's add a bit more shading to this. We're not getting super realistic or detailed with the shading, but just enough to give it a little bit more form. So let's start with our skull. I'm going to go over to the layer with the skull, and I'm going to tap the skull shape layer, then tap the plus sign to create a new layer above that I'm going to use for my shading. It's going to automatically be a clipping mask because I placed it between another clipping mask, so they'll just stack on top of each other. And then I'm going to use just pure black for my shading. I want it to be this really contrasty, kind of intense style. And then we're going to add a little bit of reflective light into it to make it kind of pop and add a little bit more color. So starting with black, the brush that I'm going to use next is the simple shader brush. And this brush is, again, it's a shading brush. It's got soft edges, but it has a nice texture to it. It's not quite as grungy as the coarse shader. It's a little softer, and I think it'll be nice for the shading. Let's go maybe down with the brush size, 40% or so. Yeah, and then I'm just going to kind of softly come in along the side and the bottom and just paint in a little bit of this. I'm going to go ahead and do another pass. Maybe I'll go smaller with my brush size so that I can get it like nice and dark right along the edge. Kind of like that. You don't want to add too much of the shading or it will get really dark and start looking like your skull has a beard. So just a little bit will do, especially when you're doing it with a really dark color like black. I'm going to do something similar to the candle. So I'm going to go over to the candle layer. I'm going to tap above the layer with the like waxy drips, and then I'll create a layer right above that. And then I'll have to set this one to be a clipping mask. So tap it and choose clipping mask. And then I'm just going to add a little bit of shading along one side, not a lot. There we go. Okay. And next we're going to make these shadows pop a little bit by adding some reflected light into them. So I'm going to go back to the skull. I'm going to use that same layer that I did the dark black shading on. I'm going to use that layer again. And now I'm going to paint in some reflected light kind of coming back into these shadows. Basically, your light source is going to hit the surface that your object is sitting on, and then it's going to bounce back a little bit and hit the object. So you have this kind of like other light kind of like coming back into your shadows. So I'm going to start with my background color because that's the color of my surface, so to speak. And then I'm just going to choose a little bit warmer, a little bit brighter version of that color, maybe going into the pinks a little bit. And then I'll zoom in and I'm just going to paint this color in just a little bit into these shadows. That's probably too much. You might want to make your brush size smaller if it's hard to control. There we go. So just like a little bit light kind of reflected back into that shadow. I'm going to do the same thing on the candle. So I'll go to that layer and maybe smaller brush size. Just kind of paint that in a little bit. So that really makes these shadows pop and also gives it this nice almost kind of glow effect, which we are going to add an even more intense glow effect with this candle. But first, I need a little bit of shadow underneath my skull. So I'm going to go down to the layer with the skull, create a new layer, and then move it below the skull. And then I'm going to select my background color and choose a darker, more saturated version of that color. And then I'm just going to draw, kind of paint in softly a bit of a drop shadow underneath my skull. Kind of sort of almost like an oval shape, like this. A little bit more down there. And then right here, very close to where the skull actually hits the surface, we're going to use an even darker color, like almost black. Smaller brush size. So this right here where it hits the surface, this really dark, really small shadow is going to help make this object feel grounded on the surface that it's sitting on. Cool, that looks good. Now it's time to add a fun glow effect to our candle. And we're going to do this using a blend mode. So I'm going to go up to my layers. I'm going to tap the top layer and then tap the plus sign to create a new layer above everything else. And I'm going to go into the blend modes, which you can access by tapping this little N. And then I'm going to go to the add blend mode. And this is a blend mode that has an extreme lightening effect. So it's really great for doing glow type effects. So switch it to the add blend mode. And then for the colors, I'm going to go into some warm colors. So kind of these like reddish oranges. And then I'm going to choose a dark, fairly saturated color to do this. The darker the color you use, the less of lightning effect you'd have. If you use a really bright color, it'd be a really bright lightning effect. So you'll kind of see we're going to create a glow and then we're going to make it brighter as you're closer to the flame. So I'm just choosing like a dark saturated color to start. And then I'm still using that simple shader brush that I've been using to do all this shading. So for the size, I'm going to start pretty big. I'm going to start maybe at like 40%. And then I'm just going to, right over the flame, just draw very lightly, kind of circular motions to create this glow around it with like these soft edges like that. Then I'm going to go to my colors and I'm going to choose a little bit lighter version of that color. And then I'm going to draw a little bit right over the center of the flame like that. And then I'm going to go even lighter, maybe a little smaller with my brush size, and just add in one more little glow right over the flame. And as you can see, because we're using a blend mode, it affects all the layers below it. So it gives this nice glow to the top of the candle, but it also kind of like messes with our flame a little bit. So we kind of have to compensate for that sometimes when we're using blend modes. So let's fix our little flame real quick. I'm going to go to the layer with the flame. And then I'm going to go over to my adjustments menu, which is the little magic wand, and choose Hue, Saturation, Brightness. And now I can use these sliders to kind of get it looking a little more as I wanted it to look. So I still want to see like the yellow and the orange. So I'm just moving the brightness slider down a little bit. You can also increase the saturation just to see, you know, just kind of play and see how it looks good to you. You can play with the hue. I think that looks pretty good right there. And then I'm actually going to add one more final glow kind of over the whole top half of this piece. So it really looks like it's glowing. So I'm going to create a new layer above everything else. So above my existing glow layer, I'm going to turn this layer's blend mode to add. And then I think I'm going to start with a pretty dark saturated color again. But this time I'm going to go all the way up with my brush size. Zoom out just a little bit. Start right here in the middle. And then just kind of paint over the whole top half of the illustration with these like circular motions. Trying to keep the edges soft, but kind of fill in the whole top half. And what I like about this is now that I have this glow so big, it's falling into the black areas of the skull, and they kind of have a little bit of a glow to them, which I think looks really cool. But our candle has gotten a little bit bright. So just like we adjusted the flame, you know, you can go back and adjust things after you use a blend mode. Sometimes you have to do that. So I'm going to go to my layer with the candle shape and just go to Hue, Saturation, Brightness, and maybe make it a little darker. Maybe adjust the hue. I want it to be a little more purple. can make it more or less saturated. I think that looks pretty good. I also kind of have to adjust the like drippy parts because they're a little bit bright now. So just going to darken them a little bit, maybe desaturate. So they make them a little more warm. There we go. That looks pretty good. And then as one final little touch, I want to add some little sparkle stars around my candle. If you have been following me for a while, you know I love to add these little sparkly stars to a lot of my pieces, but I actually think it really works well for this particular piece. Kind of adds to that mystical, magical feel. So I'm choosing an orange. I think that'll look nice. And I'm going to use the grainy liner to do this. And I'm just going to go ahead. I think that's a little too dark, so I'm going to go a little brighter. More yellow orange. There we go. And then I'm just going to add some little like asterisk style stars around here. I like to mix it up with those like 6 pointed stars and then like little kind of cross stars like that for variety. So add in as many of those as you'd like. I think that looks pretty good. And with that finishing touch, we are all done with this illustration. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Thank you so much for watching. Again, I'm Lisa Bardot, and I help people find their creativity through drawing on the iPad. If you enjoyed learning from this video, you'll love being a member of Art Makers Club. We've got a growing library of premium courses, exclusive classes, and expanded in-depth tutorials with extra goodies to help you learn, like Procreate files of what we're drawing so you can see how the layers are broken down and get a closer look at what brushes we use, the Procreate color palette, additional instructions, and more. You'll get to join in members-only live events every month, such as Ask Me Anything Q&As and live drawing tutorials. In our community clubhouse, you get to connect with like-minded learning artists, share your work, ask for feedback, participate in discussions, and so much more. And you'll get instant access to the bonus brushes, a unique set of never-before-seen Bardot Brush Procreate brushes. Come join us in the club. You can learn more at artmakersclub.com. If you're sharing your work to Instagram, I would love to see it. Use the hashtag #BardotBrush. Thanks, and happy art making! If you like this video, please subscribe for more awesome tutorials, and check out one of my other videos. Have a great day!